I noticed the glitches, flickering lights, a flat tire, routine holes, and called it bad luck. Then I sat across from Elena, felt the room slow, and let common sense go quiet. Weeks of dates, detours, and delays later, the investigator, and then Elena herself, laid it bare. She was my son's paid distraction. Before we dive deeper, don't forget to subscribe and drop a comment letting us know where you're tuning in from. There are parts of me that do not change, even at 60. I still wipe the rims of coffee mugs before I hand them to someone. I still tap my pants pocket twice for my keys, even when I can feel the outline pressing into my thigh. I still take my time walking through the storage aisle behind my workshop, where cedar and elm lean shoulder to shoulder, my fingers grazing grain like a farmer who measures the season with his wrists. The shop is small. It smells like lemon oil and varnish. There is a clock with a stuttering second hand that I never repair because that imperfection calms me. After my wife, Mary Ann, died, the place kept me upright, one more route from morning to evening that I could walk in the half-dark without thinking about what was not there. My name is Arthur. I am retired from the city service that occupied my younger years, but my small side business has become the main stage I did not expect to step onto. I repair and sell custom wooden standing desks, small runs of them. A funny little enterprise born from nothing more than a grandson's request. My grandson, Thomas, had asked me for a desk that could grow with him, one he could crank by hand so he could stand and draw. I designed a crank that glided like a breeze, and it worked so well that my daughter posted a video. Orders followed. Then more orders. I started hiring a part-time helper 3 days a week. Then I stopped pretending it was a hobby. When the call came about expanding into a shared showroom, I was excited. The voice on the phone belonged to a woman named Elena Markham. She worked for a property group that managed a row of small commercial spaces a few neighborhoods away. The owners wanted to attract steady foot traffic through a rotating showcase of local makers. Half the rent, shared utilities, shared exposure. She had read reviews and liked the photographs of my desks. She asked me if I could bring a sample to the meeting, so the board could touch it, so their knuckles could learn what it felt like to touch a good thing. I said yes. My hands trembled for the rest of the day, a foolish schoolboy thing that embarrassed me in the privacy of my own shop. My son, Daniel, did not congratulate me. He laughed the way he laughs when I point out a shirt that does not fit him and he keeps it on out of spite. He said, "Dad, you are doing showrooms now." He said, "Do you even have a business plan?" I told him I did, and I told him it was written in pencil and that there was a thrill in that because you can sharpen a pencil in your pocket and keep going. He shook his head. I would like to say I pressed his hand, as fathers do in photographs from 100 years ago, but I did not. I let him stand there in my kitchen that smelled of dill and old coffee. He told me to be careful. He told me that people take advantage of older men who think they have found a second wind. I told him I knew that. I thanked him for his concern. I watched him leave a glass without rinsing it. I washed it after he left and stared at my reflection in the curve of the glass. I saw the man I have become and felt grateful that the edges of grief had dulled enough for me to meet new things with open hands. The week of the meeting, my shop went moody. Monday morning, a power surge popped the breaker and 2 sanders were cooked to a smell of warm plastic. My helper, Tyrone, swore softly and then apologized to me for swearing, because in the months we have worked together he has learned that I flinch more at careless words than at spilled paint. I called an electrician and waited. He came late because of another emergency. He replaced wires and told me the city grid was patchy here and that I might consider a surge protector for the big tools. I nodded and then wondered why I had not done that 6 months ago. On Tuesday, when I drove to the hardware supplier for a particular lacquer I favor, the store had just closed for an unexpected audit. A handwritten sign on the glass door flopped against the pane like it tried to swim away. I could have gone to another store, but I stubbornly wanted this one. I knocked. A man inside shrugged. I sat there with my hands on the wheel and the heat from the engine ghosting up the hood, feeling old and foolish. Traffic tightened on my shoulders. I returned to the shop and told Tyrone to work from the older lacquer. He did not comment. On Wednesday, Thomas's school called. He had gotten sick. I am still the emergency contact because his father's number had gone out of service for half a day that month, and my daughter is on a project with a client who does not believe in illness, rain, or parental life. I picked Thomas up. He coughed into my collar and fell asleep in the truck. I lay him on the couch in the office, opened the window a crack so the air would not seem stale, and went back to work. I sanded. I thought about the meeting. I put gloves on and then I stood and watched him breathe and wondered about Marianne's hands, how she would have brushed his hair back from his forehead with 2 fingers. Small things. That is the point I am trying to make. Small things that latch onto your ankles and pretend they are pebbles and not the first stones of an avalanche. Thursday morning, I came out to my truck and a nail had planted itself in the sidewall of the rear tire. A slow puncture, a whisper of air. I drove to the shop on the spare tire, tight at the speed limit, and then took a bus to the tire place because I did not want to wait for a pickup. The bus smelled like rain and metal. I sat in the back with my sample desk secured under a blanket. I had planned to drive it to the meeting on Friday. On the bus, I watched the city inch by and felt an odd tickle at the base of my skull, like I was being watched by someone too polite to say hello. On Friday morning, the elevator in my building died. I live on the 5th floor. I carried the sample desk in pieces. I made 3 trips. My hips stung. I took breaks on the landings. A woman with a little dog asked me if I needed help. I told her I would be embarrassed to accept it. I am not proud of that answer. The taxi driver at the curb kept clearing his throat and looking at his rearview mirror. He drove in nervous fits, like a man learning to play the drums on the brakes. My phone chimed once with an email. It was from Elena. She said, "Looking forward to today." My heart dropped and then lifted like a bird that wants to be a fish. I read her name twice. I put the phone down face first, as if I could keep that feeling inside the glass. When I arrived at the address, the building's lobby smelled faintly of oranges. I said my name to a man at a desk. He nodded without hearing. He printed a visitor badge. I stuck it to my chest where the lapel of my jacket did not cover my shirt. I followed a sign to a conference room with a table too large for the space. I set my sample in the corner. I straightened it. I breathed slowly through my nose and out my mouth. Then the door opened and Elena stepped in. She was 60, she told me later, but I would have said 55 because her posture defied the years on paper. She wore a slate jacket and a blouse like cream. She did not carry a bag. She held only a folder and a pen with a blue ribbon tied to its clip. Her hair was silver at the temples where it framed her face. She smiled, and in that moment she looked like forgiveness, like a person walking through snow and not leaving a trail. She shook my hand and then, as if catching herself, loosened her grip and glanced at the pen. The ribbon trembled. We talked about shared rent and foot traffic. There were 3 board members. One asked about insurance. One asked about fumes and ventilation. One asked whether an elevator would be essential for my deliveries. I answered every question like a boy in front of his first stern teacher, rich with facts, hopeful for a grudging smile. When Elena asked me to demonstrate the crank on my sample, I rolled the top up and down. The board members nodded. Someone said, "Clever." I did not look at Elena, but I felt her looking at the glide and felt the way she inhaled at the end of the motion. I felt seen in a way I had not felt in a long time. The meeting ended with a handshake and a tentative agreement, provided that the lease terms we discussed bore out on paper. We would meet again next week, Elena said. She suggested coffee at a place nearby rather than in the conference room, a friendly setting for the last pass through the clauses. The board members dispersed. She lingered, as if she had forgotten to staple something. We stood too close to one another for a moment, and then we stepped back because we were 60 and understood that proximity is a kind of promise whether we want it to be or not. "Would you like to walk with me to the corner?" she asked. "There is a florist on the way. I have a standing order for roses for my sister." "Of course," I said. I cannot write down the way my voice sounded because I do not know if I could bear to admit that I heard in it a younger man who thought himself invisible to pain. We walked. She told me she had been a paralegal for 20 years before switching to property management. She said she liked the clarity of leases, the way the words could be made to behave if you found the right ones. She told me she became a widow 8 years ago, that her husband had been kind and then very suddenly gone, and that she had learned to make roast chicken that did not taste like grudging sustenance. She laughed and the laugh did not feel like decoration. I told her about Marianne. I spoke without the hard stone in my throat. In the florist shop, she bought crimson roses, not the pale ones. "My sister thinks red is too forward," she said. "But I think red forgives the day more thoroughly." We parted at the corner where a bus sighed and knelt to let a man with a cane climb in. I wanted to ask her to dinner, and I did not because the warmth in my chest felt like I had just stepped into a church. I went home and sat at the table and stared at the place where Marianne used to fold napkins in half before she placed them, and I felt guilty for feeling light. The next week was a string of off-key notes that I hummed along to because I did not want to break the song. My bank app blocked me from checking my account on Monday morning. "Unusual activity," it said. I drove to the branch. The teller recognized me because I always bring butterscotch candies for the dish on the counter. She smiled and typed. "It is a routine hold," she said. "It will clear. It happens sometimes when you order from a new vendor." I had not ordered from a new vendor. I said nothing. I went home. A letter arrived about a credit line that I did not recall requesting. The phone number printed at the bottom rang forever. When a man picked up, he told me I had clicked a link and I told him I had not. He said, "It happens." His voice sounded like he had practiced sympathy for a class. On Tuesday, Elena sent a message saying the coffee shop we planned to meet at had closed for a private event. She suggested a different place 3 blocks south. I said yes. At the new place, a barista accidentally spilled a ribbon of latte across the table. We laughed and moved to another one. Elena dabbed the edge of the table with a napkin, careful about not wasting it, like someone raised in a house where paper towels were a luxury. She asked me about my grandson. I told her about Thomas's cough and the way his eyebrows lift when he is about to tell a joke. She smiled at my words in a way that made me think about hands on backs and a bowl of soup on a rainy day and what it might feel like to reach for someone and not reach into shadow. The bank hold cleared. The credit line letter turned out to be a mistaken duplicate of an application I had actually submitted 2 months ago. The man on the phone apologized for the fright and told me there was a glitch in their batch mailing. I told myself some of it was plain bureaucracy, but the timing, always near Elena or money, felt like a pattern I could sense even if I couldn't yet prove it. I felt foolish. That feeling followed me like a friendly dog that I could not dislodge from my ankles. Our second meeting with the property board went smoothly. The lease looked clean. The only sticking point was a clause about signage. We resolved it. Elena touched the pen ribbon, and once again I watched it tremble and felt like someone was walking their fingers down my spine, gentle, counting bones as if they had forgotten their names and were pleased to learn them again. We started walking together after meetings, then once on a Saturday when she messaged me, "The museum has a new exhibit of tools. They are older than both of us combined. Would you like to go?" The museum was cool and clean. The exhibit was a love letter to the way humans tame wood and stone. She laughed when I corrected the guide under my breath. I knew that should have embarrassed me, but the way she touched my elbow made the embarrassment turn to steam and leave the room. We had soup afterward at a stall that played jazz too loud. I watched her fingers around a spoon. When she lifted her eyes to mine, I felt the old ache for sorrow in those eyes softening under a light I had forgotten I knew. Every time we met, something small went wrong. A taxi driver took a pointless long route. My phone froze and had to restart. The bridge I used to avoid the traffic on Roosevelt was suddenly closed for maintenance because someone had reported a crack. The restaurant host looked at his screen, frowned, and insisted that my reservation was for the next night. We laughed these things off. We told each other that it was funny, that we were cursed like people in a television show who never get to kiss because an elevator door always closes right before they do. One evening, after a long walk where we spoke more with our breath than with our mouths, Elena stood at the bottom of my steps and reached up to the handrail. Her left hand shook. She swallowed and tried to cover it with a smile. I asked if she wanted to come up, without leaning that word on the side that would make it collapse under meaning. She started to nod and then shook her head. "Another time," she said. She put her hand into her coat pocket and took out the ribbon pen. She twirled it once. "I am late for something." It was not a good excuse and it was not meant to be. She left. I watched the corner where she disappeared. I went upstairs and stood in my dark kitchen. I listened to the hum of my refrigerator and knew my name again. The next morning, my bank called. A cheerful woman named Myra wanted to confirm a wire transfer. She read the amount and my blood cooled. It was not small. I had initiated no such transfer. I said so in a voice that sounded like I had lost my teeth. She placed a hold. She said words that pinballed off the inside of my skull. Security team. Temporary. Alert. I wrote the words down and made a column of them like a grocery list. When I hung up, I saw rings of wet on the wood of my counter. I must have placed my glass down without a coaster, something Marianne would have teased me for until we had become old and good with each other. I did not call my son. I do not know why. Habit, perhaps. Pride. The stubbornness that has kept me safe and also alone. Instead, I called a private investigator. The voice at the other end of the line belonged to a woman in her 30s named Rufina Gomez. She listened without interruption. She asked gentle, practical questions about my accounts, about my email, about who had access to my devices. She asked me if anyone new had entered my life in the last few months. I said, yes. A woman named Elena. She did not comment. We agreed to meet at a diner that still had a neon sign that flashed "Cough EEE" because the second F had died in 1998 and no one had replaced it. She wore a jacket too thin for the weather and a ring without a stone. Her eyes were the brown of very old whiskey. She ate pie while I talked. She recorded me with a small black recorder that she placed on a napkin as if it needed to dress for dinner. She asked me to forward her every email I had received about the credit line. She asked for my permission to install monitoring software on my computer. I agreed. She asked me not to call the bank again until she asked me to, unless there was a true emergency. I agreed to that as well. I told Elena I had a busy week. She smiled through the phone and told me that she did too. She told me she would message me if the property group had updates. I stared at the phone after we hung up. I held it like a seashell and listened to the silence inside. Within 2 days, Rufina called me. It was mid-afternoon, light like poured milk in my workshop, dust moving in it like small planets. She told me that someone had added an authorized user to one of my credit cards. The name was familiar. It was a man my son had done business with years ago. I felt the earth soften under my shoes. She told me that a device had logged into my email from a new location twice in the last week. The IP address resolved to a co-working space I had never visited. She told me my phone had been cloned for a short period 2 months earlier. Just long enough to catch your two-factor authentication code for the credit line, she said. It is crude but effective. There are moments when a person you think you are looks back at you and says, "Are you still playing at this?" My name is Arthur. I am 60. I have been a widower for 6 years. I have 2 children. My daughter, Hannah, is steady and generous and sometimes scolds me with her eyes. My son, Daniel, is proud in ways that do not bend easily. He has needed more than he has earned since he was 22. He is my son. I love him like a cup loves water. That does not make him good. I need you to be honest with me, Rufina said. Do you suspect your son? I said, I do not know what I suspect. That is not an answer, she said, not unkindly. I suspect him, I said. Saying it made my lungs work hard as if they were sick of the way I had treated them. She did not ask why. She did not have to. The list was too long. Financial borrowing that lasted years. A series of jobs left under clouds. A new business every spring and a new failure every fall. Charming friends who had a way of not paying restaurant bills. A wife who left because love could not feed on the leftovers forever. The way he looked at me now, like I was stubborn on purpose and that my refusal to hand him everything was a kind of theft. Do you think the woman is involved? Rufina asked. I said no. Then I said I did not know. Then I told her about the elevator, the flat tire, the closed bridge, the spilled latte, the museum, the way the barista had called me by my last name before I had given it. I had laughed about that. Now I did not laugh. Someone is trying to wear you down, Rufina said mildly. The small inconveniences, the interruptions, the tiny stresses, they are meant to make you misstep. Being late. Being distracted. Being grateful when someone helps you at just the right moment. You signed anything at any point on your dates? No, I said, offended, then less so. We mentioned the lease, but we did not sign anything outside the meetings. Good, she said. Do not sign anything outside a meeting, ever. I know you know that, but I am saying it out loud so we both hear it. I nodded, which she could not see, and then agreed again. That night, in bed, I watched the light from the street draw a ladder on my ceiling and felt like a child who would never be brave enough to climb it. I thought about Elena's hands. I thought about the ribbon. I thought about Daniel's face when he is caught in a lie and has not had time to dress it like the truth. I thought about the way my heart had learned a new beat and was not about to slow just because a different part of me wanted to scream. Rufina's report arrived 2 days later. She sent it as a PDF attached to an email with no subject line. It was 22 pages. It began with a polite paragraph that said she had found patterns she believed warranted discussion. It included screenshots and photographs and lists of calls. There was a photograph of Elena on the sidewalk outside my building the night the elevator had died. She was not looking up. She was texting. Behind her, 2 men in orange vests were placing a sandwich board that said, "Elevator temporarily out of service." I did not know what to feel. There was a screenshot of a payment from a shell company with a forgettable name to a man whose name I recognized from one of Daniel's old ventures, a man who always wore good shoes and smiled like a dentist. The memo said, "Scheduling." There were copies of emails sent to the board of the property group from an address created 2 weeks earlier with a typo in the company name, asking for last-minute rescheduling. The signature was Elena's name, and the closing line used a phrase she did not use. There was a blurry photograph of Daniel sitting on a bench outside that same property group. His ankles were crossed. He was holding a paper cup. He was not looking anywhere except the middle distance. That photograph was taken on a day I had been in the building for a meeting. There was a note from Rufina saying, "He waited where you could not possibly accidentally find him." The worst page was the simplest. It was a printout from a secure delivery service that had changed the drop time for one of my shipments of lumber. The signature for the change request was mine. But the S in Arthur was wrong. I have written my name so many times I could do it while asleep. That S had a kink in it I had bled out of my hand in high school. I stared at it and thought of Daniel at 9 years old, hunched over a spelling worksheet, forging my signature on a permission slip because he had ripped his real one and was too afraid to ask me to sign another one. I had forgiven him then. I had taught him how to ask. The page dimmed and I realized tears had smeared the ink in my eyes. I wiped them and saw clearly. The child learns. The man chooses. Rufina wrote in the last paragraph of her report that she could tie the payments from the shell company to a holding account that was in turn linked to a business Daniel had opened 6 months ago. The business had no storefront. It had a website that promised a service so vague no one could possibly complain when it did nothing but invoice. The payments into that business account were not large. There were many. She could tie at least 4 of those payments to the shell company that had paid the man in the orange vest photograph. "I am sorry," she said when I called her. "There is something else." I found a message. It is a photograph of a photograph. Hard to say whether it is definitive. But it is interesting. She texted it to me. It showed Elena and Daniel in a coffee shop I recognized, seated facing one another in a way that suggested they had arranged their bodies to be able to leave at different times without drawing attention. He was leaning forward. She was looking at her hands. The ribbon from her pen was looped around her finger like a thread she was trying not to snap. I did not sleep that night. I made tea at 3 in the morning and stood at the window. Our building's hallway light clicked on once, then off once, then on again. I decided that I would not confront anyone without hearing them first. That may sound like a rationalization, but to me it felt like respect for the boy I had raised and the woman I thought I knew. I sent Elena a message at 6. It said, simply, "Can we walk tonight?" She answered within 2 minutes. Yes. 6:30. Your corner. I spent the day moving through my own story like a man in a hallway lined with mirrors. Every step I took reflected back at me not as a man walking, but as a man rehearsing walking. Tyrone asked me twice if I was all right, and I smiled too broadly and told him that I was fine, that the lease was nearly done, that I might actually need him 4 days a week soon. He grinned in that solemn way he has when he is proud of himself but does not want to appear cocky. At 6:30, I was on the corner. Elena arrived exactly on time. She wore a navy coat buttoned too high. She had not brought the pen. We walked toward the reservoir. The temperature had dropped enough that the air tasted metallic. She did not speak for 3 blocks. Then she stopped and turned to me and said a single sentence that cut the rope in my chest, holding everything in place. I had been doing something I am ashamed of. She told me without ornament. She told me she had accepted money from Daniel to distract me, to be with me, to keep me from looking too closely at certain things at certain times. She told me she had agreed to nudge, to pick the wrong coffee shop, to whisper timing into the ear of a man who knew a man who could make a small problem appear in my path. She told me she was never supposed to hurt me. She told me she had been told that the reason was that I was not well, that I was grieving to a degree that made me unreliable with my business finances, that as my son, Daniel had to step in, this would help him prove that I would be better off taking a step back. She told me she had believed enough of that to say yes. She told me that then she had met me and her belief had cracked. I did not expect to like you, she said. That is an ugly sentence. It is also the truest thing I can think to say. I asked how she knew Daniel. She said he had approached her after reading a public profile piece that had mentioned her work at the property group. She said the arrangement was entirely private, her employer knew nothing about it and would not have approved. He had told her that he knew me well. He had said that I was fragile. He had said he would pay her to help him protect me and protect my business by creating a context in which my decisions looked increasingly poor. That way, when he stepped in, no one would question it. He had told her that I had been careless since Marianne died, that I had already given money to a woman who had disappeared, that he was trying to save Hannah's inheritance. All lies. Some lies wrapped around slivers of truth the way vines wrap around a fence, hiding it until it looks natural. I did not ask enough questions, she said. I did not want to hear the answers. I wanted the money. That is the shameful part one cannot soften. She reached into her pocket and handed me a folded envelope. Inside were photographs and screenshots. Messages from Daniel. Instructions. His tone was mildly authoritarian, as if he could not imagine that someone would not do as he asked. I recognized this, and that alone was a small insult to the father I had tried to be. I have already told him I will not do it anymore, she said. I told him yesterday. He threatened me. I do not scare easily, but I will tell you that because I am telling you everything. I stood on the sidewalk and watched a man pull a sled across the park grass as if snow might fall if he insisted on it. You are telling me now because you feel guilty, I said. I am telling you now because I fell in love with you, she said, and then she looked away like she was ashamed of the way those words made her body swing open like a door in wind. I did not speak. She had said the very words that I would have chosen if I were brave enough and cruel enough to risk them. The world steadied under my shoes in the simplest way. The tree branches above us were sharper against the sky. The pale blur of a dog's path became a line you could draw with your finger. The ache in my hip had edges I could predict. I have brought you proof, she said. And I am going to speak to anyone you ask me to. I am going to make this right as far as I can, even though I know that does not erase what I have done. I am so sorry, Arthur. You did not deserve to be a project. We walked until the reservoir fence gave way to the playground fencing. A child in a red hat tried to climb the wrong side, laughed, fell, and then scrambled up again with stubborn joy. I thought about Daniel at that age, how he once cried for 10 minutes because he could not fit his sock over his heel and then refused every hand until he figured it out alone. I think I have been reluctant to name what my son is because to do so would make it literally final. I think Elena's confession did not cut me. It removed the scab. The wound beneath was old. It needed air. The next morning I met with an attorney. I have never enjoyed the way lawyers arrange their pens on their desks. This one liked perfect perpendicular lines. He listened, mouth closed, as if that were his skill. He told me simple things in a simple voice. Freeze the accounts. Remove Daniel as an emergency contact for any financial matters. Send a cease and desist letter to Daniel and to his business. File a report with the police for the attempted wire transfer. Consider a restraining order if there is any hint of escalation. He told me that if I want to go further, I could sue the shell company and the people involved and squeeze them until their names emerged. He told me that if I wanted a different kind of closure, I could use the threat of all of that to extract a written admission and restitution. He did not say what he would do. He did not need to. This was not his family. But per his advice, I phoned the precinct to request a patrol car to stand by during my meeting with Daniel. No drama, just a quiet presence in case the day tipped. I called Daniel. I told him to meet me at my shop. I did not tell him anything else. He walked in with a smile that was prepared for a father's apology. He stopped smiling when he saw Rufina at the table. He stopped any expression when he saw Elena sitting beside her, hands folded around a pen without a ribbon. He said my name as if it were a question he had answered 10,000 times and now was bored. Dad. I asked him to sit. He did not. I did not mind. I read the letter my attorney had prepared. It said that I was aware of the attempted theft, the manipulation, the collusion. It said I was prepared to press charges. It listed the relevant sections of the law. It used language like unfit and negligent that must have stung because they were words he had thrown at me in other contexts and that now felt ridiculous against him. I said, "You are my son. I loved you before you were a name. I had hoped that would be the last thing that mattered." He began to talk. It was a flood without water. He told me he had been trying to save me. He told me I had always been too soft. He told me that Marianne had made me tender and that tenderness had turned to rot in the barrel of my finances. He told me that Hannah had enough. He told me that he was the one who had stayed near me, which was true only if you stand close to someone to pick their pocket. He told me that Elena had seduced him and that this was all her idea. He said everything but sorry. That is what I heard. That silence was louder than the sirens in the street. Rufina slid a sheet of paper across the table. His signature was on it. The wire transfer. The shell company application. The message where he used a word for his sister that betrayed him more than any lawyer could. He did not look at it. He stared at me and smiled his mother's tired smile. I realized with a sharpness that surprised me that the worst of him did not belong to her or to me. It belonged to a part of him that had decided long ago that asking was a kind of weakness he could not tolerate in himself. "This is what is going to happen," I said. "You are going to use the money you have taken to pay back what you have tried to take. You are going to sign a document rescinding any claim on my accounts. You are going to stay away from my shop and from my home. You are going to accept that your inheritance is not a guarantee and will be determined by a will you will not see. You are going to leave now because if you do not, I am going to let him s. Gomez here hand this envelope to the officer who is sitting in his car outside waiting for my signal to come in. He laughed. Then he stopped laughing. He looked at Elena. He said a word I will not write. It does not deserve ink. He told me this was not fatherly. He told me he would tell everyone I had lost my mind. He told me he would bring Hannah down with me. He told me he would sue me for slander. He said everything that men like him say when they see the door closing. He signed the papers. He walked out. He did not look back. I listened to his footsteps. In my mind, they were those of a boy in socks late at night. In reality, they were the clicks of a man wearing shoes that pinched because he had not bought them for comfort. The next days were days of paperwork. You cannot have a clean ending without stamps and signatures and envelopes with windows that show your name. The bank reversed the wire. The shell company had a mailbox that I visited with a detective, and the smell inside was bleach and stale breath. The man in the orange vest who had placed the sign in front of my elevator was questioned and then eager to talk. He had done it for cash. He had done similar things for other men. He cried when the detective asked him about his mother. That is a stupid detail to include. It is true. Human sadness is stubborn. I told Hannah everything. She listened and then she cried and then she called her brother and told him that she would not speak to him until he apologized to me. He did not. She did not speak to him. She came over with Thomas and we sat on the floor and played a game where you stack wooden animals until one falls off. Thomas pointed at my face and asked if I had a cold because my eyes were red. I told him I had sneezed and then we all laughed at nothing because sometimes laughter is the only way to pry open the day. Elena and I met in the park. We sat on a bench. She looked at me with a steadiness I had not earned and yet felt grateful to receive. I told her that I forgave her. She told me that she would apologize every time she saw me until I asked her to stop. I told her that would not be necessary. I told her that forgiveness felt like choosing to water the plants you can keep alive and letting the others go. She smiled a little at that. She said she had left the property group. She said she did not want to be anywhere near that part of town for a while. She said she had enough saved for some time. She did not ask me for help. That silence was a kind of apology all by itself. We did not rush toward whatever we were. We took small steps that did not need to be performed for anyone else. She came to my shop on a Tuesday and watched me plane a plank until it sang under the blade. She asked me to teach her how to sand. She wore an apron that still smelled faintly of the roast chicken she had spoken of. She turned the crank on the sample desk and smiled the way people smile when they are allowed to do something beautiful and functional at the same time. I made soup and she folded napkins in half and then in half again because her mother had done that. We argued about forks. We made each other tea. The lease went through. The property group replaced Elena with a man who used the word synergy twice in the first meeting. I decided to participate for 6 months. The showroom was bright. People came in and did not understand at first why my desks were special, and then they put their hands on the crank and found out. I stored a few bowls there, too, because I liked the way light sits in a bowl. Tyrone shook hands with a woman who wanted a desk in walnut and would not have walnut because she liked red oak but did not know it yet. He is learning to guide without pushing. He will be better at it than I am, because he is 23 and pays attention differently. I told myself I would not think about Daniel every day. I did. But the heat of that thought changed. It became something like the warmth of a hand placed briefly on my shoulder by a stranger to steady themselves and then removed. I changed my will. I changed the locks. I changed my habits. Those are small, powerful acts. I watered the plants I can keep alive. The last time I saw Daniel was 6 months later at a grocery store where he had ducked down the cereal aisle to avoid me and then realized I had already seen him, and ramming himself into a stack of boxes would only make him look like a man ramming himself into a stack of boxes. He stood. He said, "Dad." He did not say he was sorry. I said, "Hello, Daniel." We stared at one another across a small distance that felt enormous. He asked me if I was going to forgive him. I told him I had already done that part, not for him, but for me. He asked me if I was going to undo the changes to my will. I told him that forgiveness and trust are not the same. He told me that Hannah was turning her back on him. I told him that he could walk around and look at what he had built. He said a few more words that did not matter. He walked away. He did not look back. That night, Elena and I walked by the reservoir again. We held hands like polite people. We talked about whether to go to the museum or to the park on Saturday. We saw a child in a red hat try the wrong side of the fence again. He fell and got up. I thought of Daniel, but I did not think only of him. I thought of the coil that had unwound in me, letting me stretch in the small space left by grief and disappointment. I thought of Marianne and did not feel I was doing her an injustice by looking at Elena and seeing something alive. When we reached the corner near my building, I paused. The elevator light was on. It would probably die again someday. I would carry things up the stairs on those days. I would ask for help more quickly. I would accept it when it was offered. The door opened and a woman I did not know stepped out and smiled at us both. We stepped in. The door closed. We rose. Truth first. That is the rule I write on the inside of my wrist now, in letters only I can see. Truth first, and then mercy if it can come. On a Sunday afternoon later that year, while I was closing up the showroom, a boy stopped at the window and pointed to the crank. His father bent and whispered into his ear. The boy's eyes widened. He opened the door and asked if he could try, and I said yes. In the mirror of the window, a man with gray hair and a woman with silver at her temples stood like two trees that had finally figured out how to share light. The boy turned the crank and laughed. The day clicked into place. And in that quiet click, in that simple motion of wood and hand, I felt the steady hum of a life I could recognize and choose, even after betrayal, even after a son's blindness, even after a love that entered my life under false papers and found its real name. I do not know what Daniel will do. Perhaps he will stomp down another aisle of cereal and pretend that it is a new road. Perhaps he will stop. Perhaps he will call. The part of me that kept shirts folded in Marianne's drawer for a year after she died wants redemption stories that look like television finales. Real life has fewer speeches and more paperwork. I have signed my paperwork. I have arranged my pens in crooked rows. I have learned that it is not an insult to truth to let kindness sit beside it. Elena told me the other night, in a kitchen that smelled like garlic and thyme, that love at 60 is a different animal. It walks to the door instead of rushing it. It waits to be let in. It does not mind if you hang up a coat before you say hello. I told her that I love her. I said it simply, like I was setting a cup on a table and both of us could see what was in it. She said it back. The glass did not crack. The table did not tilt. The room did not need to, because truth was already here. This is what I know now, delays are not always accidents. They can be arranged like chairs in a room for a party you do not want to attend. People you love can decide they will sit in those chairs and clap when the song starts. But you can also decide to leave the room. You can decide to step into the hall and find someone waiting with a coat in their hands and a pen with a ribbon tied to it, ready to write down the real story, the story where you are no longer a project, the story where you are a person again. I did not miss the signs. I ignored them. And then I opened my eyes. And when I did, I found that the world, despite my son's schemes and my own cowardice, despite the small cruelties done in the name of love, still had the same grain through it as the wood I plane every day. If you respect it, if you work with it, if you accept the shape it offers, it will hold weight. It will hold your weight. It will hold the weight of loss. It will hold the weight of love. And if you are lucky, you will get to share that weight with someone who will not let go as easily as a man who only ever closes doors.
Hello everyone, and thank you for watching. I truly hope you enjoyed listening to this story as much as I enjoyed creating it. If you did, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel to help support the creation of more stories like this. Have a great day or evening.